Welcome, welcome, my friends, to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you as always by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge, smoke Camels for 30 days, and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. Well, my friends, it's been another week of very bad news. For me, what's been troubling me all week has been the situation in Sudan. As you know, taught Holocaust, I taught genocide rather, and for the last couple of decades, I've been speaking to my students about the genocide in Darfur. It's a horrible, horrible situation, and going on, ongoing genocide in front of our very eyes in the last 2 decades, and 200,000 people were slaughtered between 2003 and 2006 or so, but 2.5 million refugees, 250,000 people living in refugee camps in the desert in Chad. And then I mentioned last week that the week ago or 2 weeks ago that violence has reemerged. The civil war going on once again. They're fighting. The generals are fighting against one another, and it just bodes a world of suffering for people who have already suffered so much. And it's we live in a country where we're now used to the idea of mass murders. There's so many weapons and so many murders, and they're ongoing, and you know that there's going to be more and more and more. And we just have to live with this situation because we cannot fix it. And the same is true globally with genocide. Darfur is simply one genocide of many that we have seen since we said never again. And it's just a very distressing situation. And that brings me to a new book that I came across this week by Adam Kirsch. Actually, let me I'll share my screen and I'll show you the picture of the book. Here's the book. It's The Revolt Against Humanity, Imagining a Future Without Us, obviously Imagining a Future Without Humans, by Adam Kirsch. And it's just really fascinating book. I'm not alone, apparently. There are at least two different groups of intellectuals who are now accepting the fact that the human species is inevitably going to be extinct relatively soon. And one of them are the well, actually, let me pick this up, and I'll read a little bit from it because I think it's really worthwhile. Here it is. Okay, so I'm reading from a synopsis of the book by Adam Kirsch that appeared in I guess this month's Atlantic Monthly. And it's entitled "The People Cheering for Humanity's End." A disparate group of thinkers say that we should welcome our demise. And he starts off with this quote: "Man is an invention of recent date and one perhaps nearing its end." With this declaration in The Order of Things, 1966, the French philosopher Michel Foucault heralded a new way of thinking that would transform the humanities and social sciences. Foucault's central idea was that the ways we understand ourselves as human beings aren't timeless or natural, no matter how much we take them for granted. Rather, the modern concept of man was invented in the 18th century, and with the emergence of new modes of thinking about biology, society, language, and eventually it will replaced in turn. So as Foucault writes in his book's famous last sentence, one day man would be erased like a face drawn in the sand at the edge of the sea. But the image of humanity can be withdrawn can be redrawn only if human beings continue to exist. Even the most radical 20th century thinkers stopped short of the prospect of actual extinction of Homo sapiens, which would mean the end of all of our projects, values, and meanings. Humanity may be destined to disappear someday, but almost everyone would agree that that day should be postponed as long as possible, and just as most individuals generally try to delay the inevitable end of their own life. In recent years, however, a disparate group of thinkers has begun to challenge this core assumption. From Silicon Valley boardrooms to rural communes to academic philosophy departments, a seemingly inconceivable idea is being seriously discussed, and that of the end of humanity's reign on Earth is imminent, and that we should welcome it. The revolt against humanity is still new enough to appear outlandish, but it has already spread beyond the fringes of the intellectual world, and in the coming years and decades, it has the potential to transform politics and society in profound ways. This view finds support among very different kinds of people: engineers and philosophers, political activists and would-be hermits, novelists and paleontologists. Not only do they not see themselves as a single movement, but in many cases, they want nothing to do with one another. Indeed, the turn against human primacy is being driven by two ways of thinking that appear as opposites, speed of opposites. The first is Anthropocene anti-humanism, and that's where I would belong, inspired by the revulsion at humanity's destruction of the natural environment. The anti-humanist future and the transhumanist future are opposites in most ways, but both are worlds from which human beings have disappeared, and rightfully so. The transhumanists are the ones who believe that that human beings should that we should take human intelligence and put it inside a machine, so we won't exist as we are today, but we will exist as some kind of a new thing that is not human, but our memories and minds and will be preserved. The Anthropocene anti-humanists, don't see that as at all likely. In the 21st century, Anthropocene anti-humanism offers a much more radical response to a much deeper ecological crisis. It says that our self-destruction is now inevitable, and that we should welcome it as a sentence that has been justly passed on ourselves. Some anti-humanist thinkers look forward to the extinction of our species, while others predict that even if some of people survive the coming environmental collapse, civilization as a whole is doomed. Like all truly radical movements, Anthropocene anti-humanism begins not with a political program, but with a philosophical idea. It is a rejection of humanity's traditional role as Earth's protagonists, the most important being in creation. That gives you a little taste of this. It's really very interesting. And I was thinking about it this week, and I was thinking about this book, The Intellectuals and the Masses, a book that I read in 1994, and it was a time when I was working on Raymond B. Cattell, and the thesis of this book is that between 1880 and 1940, intellectuals began to see the masses as a serious problem to the future of humanity. And here's just a quote from D.H. Lawrence, the author of Lady Chatterley's Lover. But it was typical of intellectuals of this era. He says that if I had my way, I would build a lethal chamber as big as the Crystal Palace, with a military band playing softly and a cinematograph working brightly, and then I'd go to the back streets and main streets and bring them all in, all the sick, the halt, the maimed. I would lead them gently, and they would smile a weary thanks, and the band would softly bubble out the Hallelujah chorus as they were all marched into this gas chamber to be exterminated. So it's this extraordinary and I think convincing book about the prejudices of intellectuals who were very concerned about the masses. Raymond B. Cattell was one of these, and he thought that the money that was spent in England for social welfare programs would better have been spent in giving geniuses like himself, money to continue their research. And he coined the term genthanasia, by which he said we need to get away from genocide because everybody gets crazy when they hear the term. Genthanasia is a much softer term, and it just means that we're going to allow incompetent societies to go to the wall. These are his words. In other words, when there's mass starvation and collapse in a particular area of the world, instead of going in with food aid and trying to save these people and end the starvation, we should just let them be, because they obviously would like to commit genthanasia. And so it's one step from there to really seeing humanity as a enterprise that is coming to an end. So I thought this was just an interesting development in an ongoing process that I think that we're all living through, which is how do we adjust to this future. And I also found that there was there's a word called post-truth. The Oxford English Dictionary in 2016 chose the term post-truth as an international word of the year, and say it relates to or denotes circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotions and personal belief. So it's like post-truth is where the truth really no longer matters. But actually, the truth does matter. And whether we are at the brink of extinction or not, whether our civilization is collapsing or not, is not a matter of something you either believe in or you don't believe in. It's either true or it's not true. And for those who think that we are not on the precipice of extinction and our civilization is not collapsing, look around and see. I mean, where do you think we actually are going? I mean, and I see in Jewish tradition, it's a really interesting when you look at the further back you go, the more authority the leaders have, so that no one could challenge the authority of Moses. And you have in the Gemara, you have the Tanaim, which is the earlier generation, those rabbis who wrote the Mishnah, and then the Amoraim, those rabbis who wrote the Talmud, which was the commentary on the Mishnah. But the later generations always had to accept the fact that the earlier generations were on a higher level, and so you couldn't contradict them directly. You had to find some source in that generation to support your position. But the basic idea was that we were moving away from truth. Truth was not, it's the opposite of the scientific approach, which is that you build truth and you don't revere the earlier generations. You want to be as critical as possible and let ideas stand that can stand up to the test of time and scientific verification. This is a totally different view in which you move away from a reality that the truth existed in the beginning, and as you move away from revelation, things become foggier and foggier. And I think that there's some truth And the idea that earlier generations had a much simpler worldview, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have their finger on something that we might refer to as, some kind of a spiritual truth or a regular or truth. Uh, anyway, um, I'm gonna just leave it there. These are ongoing thoughts. I'll see you next week, and I hope you all have a good week. And I'm gonna post a few other little things that I put together as I was approaching this edition of More Bad News. So there'll be a couple of things up, little things that you may want to check out. I'll see you next week. Have a good week, and take the Camels Challenge.